Hi, I'm Joe, and welcome to this training for the Back to Earth Collective Composting program. This video is designed for participants of all types, and it will go step by step through the process of managing your food waste and using the equipment. If you signed up as a turner or a site lead, you'll receive some additional information specific to those roles. And if you haven't signed up yet, you can do so at onesustainablejoe.com, or you can just keep watching the video to learn more about composting. So let's get into it. The process actually starts in our kitchen, so let's go ahead there first. The very first step is to ask ourselves, can I compost this? And that is where the sorting guide comes in. You'll receive a copy when you sign up, or you can view and download it anytime on the website. First, let's take a look at the things that we can compost. We have fruits and vegetables, breads and buns, coffee grounds and their filters, rice and grains, eggshells without the insides, and nuts and seeds. We also have greasy pizza box shreds and napkins on the list, but I will circle back to those a little bit later. It's important to know that there are some things that cannot be composted with this setup, even though they are food. In particular, we have meat and bones and dairy products, which includes milk, yogurt, cheese, butter, and cream, those types of things. These should not be added. We also have cooking fats and oils and dressings and peanut butter on this list. These are things that can be added in very small quantities if, for instance, you cooked with it or used it as a light dressing. But if you find a container of it that is expired, or you have used oil from frying, do not put those into your compost. Only smaller amounts are okay, and that's why they're generally on the do not compost list. Also, we have things that are not food, might seem like they could go in, but shouldn't. And that includes pet waste, any types of bandage, used tissues, paper towel, household dust, ash and dirt, and anything marked as compostable plastic. And also, of course, anything that isn't organic, such as metal, glass, plastic, and stone. Now, if you're curious about why any of these should not be added, the reasons are all listed here at the bottom. So with that in mind, let's look at what we have here. We have some melon rinds, apple cores, an onion that didn't make it, some cucumber pieces that were bad, and a little bit of chicken bones. So going back through our list, looks like most of what we have here is good, except for we have chicken bones. Those are a no-go. Let's go ahead and get those out of the way. And it looks like what we have here is compostable. If you're dealing with leftovers from a meal that's already been prepared, it may not be as straightforward. And if you haven't composted before, you'll want to get used to thinking about your food by its parts. So one example I like to give is pasta. So the pasta itself is fine because it's grain-based, and if it's in, say, just a pure tomato sauce, that's all right. But if it's something like macaroni and cheese that has a lot of dairy in it, or it was cooked in a meat sauce or with chicken breasts, then it's not okay to add. Another example would be like a salad. You may think this is leaves, it's fine, but once again, if you've cooked chicken in your salad, that would need to be removed first before you can add it. And if you're ever unsure, you can always reach out to your site lead, who is the resident expert for your site, who can answer your questions or refer them to me. With our sorting complete, we now need to make sure that our food is compost ready, which brings us to our second step, and that's where our preparation guide comes in. First and foremost, we have to make sure that we remove anything that isn't compostable, things like rubber bands, twist ties, and produce stickers. After that, anything that's small, like peels or grains, can go in just as they are. But if you have anything that's larger or particularly whole and has a peel, it's important to make sure that we cut those open. Skins and peels are designed to protect fruits and vegetables, and they're very effective at it. So if you end up with something whole, like the onion we saw earlier, you have to cut those into smaller pieces to expose the inside. And similarly, if you have something really dense, like a carrot or a broccoli or cauliflower stalk, they take longer to decompose, so chopping them up into smaller pieces will help. Now, the smaller it is, the faster it goes, but really we only need to get down to maybe an inch or two cubed. So if we take another look here at our food that we sorted, we do have a few things that we need to prep. So we have this banana, for instance, produce sticker on it, so we'll go ahead and peel that off. We also have these, this onion here. This onion is whole, so we definitely need to cut it apart. But like I said, you really don't need to do it into too many pieces, just a couple of square inches. That should be good. And there we go. So there's that one. And we have our rinds here too, which are a little bit on the thick side. So we'll just give it a few cuts through. And there we go. And that does it for the preparing step. So that brings us to our last step in the process that takes place in the kitchen, which is storing. So when you sign up for the program, you'll receive a pail like this one that you can use to store your food waste before you bring it out to the pile. So any type of container will do. You can find a whole variety online that have different volumes and that have charcoal filter options. This is a pretty simple, pragmatic one. It has a lid that seals when it's closed, so it will contain odors, but not while it's open. So you may want to keep that in mind when you're thinking about how often you want to bring your food waste out. And no matter what type of container you use, I recommend just giving it a scrub out after you've emptied it every, I don't know, two or 3 weeks or so, just to make sure that it doesn't build up too much on the inside over time. So I want to point out a couple specific things about the lid of this container. As you can see, it has a QR code on it. And that goes to the resources page of the website, so you can view and download any of the guides that we were looking at earlier or any other information about the program. It also has a couple of items that are the site number and participant ID. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about those again later, but I just want to point those out now while we're looking at them here. So with that, we can go ahead and take our prepared food waste. We can add it to our storage container. And we can go ahead and bring it outside. Let's go. All right, now we have our food scraps, but before we go into the next step, let's take a moment to get familiar with the equipment. I do want to note that some of your equipment may look different than the equipment I'll be showing you here, but the principles will all work the same, and there will be signing with directions specific to your equipment. So let's start over on this side with the scale. This is a small but very important piece because we'll use it to measure the waste that we're diverting from the landfill. And that information will feed directly into a live dashboard on the website where you can view the performance of the program and also track and compare your waste diversion over time. And that is where the numbers on our pail come in that I pointed out earlier. We'll talk more about those once we get into that step. We also have locks. That is to make sure that only participants who are signed up are adding material and that wildlife is not taking material back out. The equipment should be locked at all times when it's not in use. And there is one lock that is used for all participants, and then these other locks are used only by the turners. You'll receive the combination for your specific lock once you complete the training. And we'll go through the unlocking once we go step by step through the process. And very importantly, you'll notice we have a few different bins. And this is where we get into the chemistry and biology of composting. So we have in the middle our browns bin, and then we have our fresh bin and our aging bin on our left and right. And here's why. The goal of composting is to optimize the decomposition process to make it work as effectively as possible. And decomposition happens because of a whole host of microorganisms generally referred to as decomposers. And they are feeding on the material and breaking it down. And arguably, one of the most important factors for their efficiency is what's referred to as the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, everything we're talking about here has both carbon and nitrogen in it, but in varying amounts. Living or recently living things, like our food waste, is generally higher in nitrogen, and we'll refer to them as greens. If they're left in a pile by themselves, they will break down poorly, they will smell, and nobody wants that. Now, on the other hand, dead, dry, brushy things are generally higher in carbon, and we'll refer to those as browns. By themselves, they will break down very, very slowly. But if we take both of them and we combine them in the right ratio, the decomposers will be happy and we'll have a very effective compost. That is why we keep a constant supply of leaves available in our browns bin. Then we take our fresh greens and our browns and we combine them into the fresh bin. Now, what is that ratio? Well, for this program, we're going to use about 1 volume of compressed leaves per volume of food waste that we have in our pail. And I'll show you that more closely once we actually go through that step of the process. Now, remember how earlier we talked about greasy cardboard shreds and paper napkins? So those actually count as browns. They do not need to be balanced by leaves. They will serve the function of leaves. So if you're adding any of those with your fresh material, count those as your browns. Also, when working with your cardboard, just be sure to add the food-stained parts and tear them into smaller pieces just like you would when preparing your food waste. Any of the clean cardboard can just be recycled. So the final bin is the aging bin, and this is because eventually our fresh bin will fill up and reach its capacity. And at that point, we will stop adding material to it, and we will let it just finish the composting process. And that's when it will become the aging bin, and then we will switch over to the other bin and use it as our fresh bin. Now, the site lead will take care of that process, and you will see the signs and locks change, but the rest of the process will work exactly the same. And lastly, keep in mind that decomposition is a natural and spontaneous process, and we are just trying to roughly optimize it. So just remember to try to get that 1-to-1 compressed leaves to food waste ratio, and also observe the pile and listen for feedback from your site lead. They will be monitoring the balance and will let you know if it needs to go in one way or the other. One of the goals of the program is just to make sure that everyone can get familiar with the observing and learning part of composting. And between your site lead and myself, we will make sure that happens. So that's it for the bins. And the last item is this rack on the end, which is used by the turners. So if you're a turner, we'll go over that during our training. If you're not, you don't have to worry about it. And that's it for all of our equipment. So let's get back into the step-by-step and finish up the process. And the next step is weighing. This step of the process is pretty straightforward. There's a sign here that shows you everything to do, so I'll just step through it so you can see what it looks like. First, we will scan the QR code, or you can enter in the web address, and that will bring up a page that looks like this. At the top, you will see two fields that are site number and particip ID, and that is where our pail lid finally comes in. If you remember from our kitchen, we have our numbers here on the bottom, and so for me, I will enter 3, because I'm at site number 3, and 2, because that's my participant ID. Next, we will go ahead and get our weight by turning on the scale. We will let it 0. We'll hang our pail. We are at 1.96 pounds, so we'll go ahead and enter that now. We can remove our pail, turn off the scale, and now we have our weight. I will also point out that on our page, we can choose to leave a note. If there's anything that happens while you're weighing in, scale malfunctions or a problem with your pail, you can send that immediately. And also, if you ever decide to not use the provided pail and get your own, there's an option for changing pails. And that is so you can set the tare weight of your new pail. Because some pails, for example, are made of stainless steel and they'll weigh about 2 pounds even when they're empty, whereas this pail weighs about 1/3 of a pound. So what you'll have to do is just take your empty pail and weigh it, and that will get your new pail weight. After that, we can go ahead and hit submit, and you'll just see a note there that says, "Got it, thanks," and your weight will be cleared. And that's it for weighing. You can also follow the button at the bottom that says View Impact Stats to view the program's dashboard on the website and find out your personal weight totals. So now we're ready to unlock the bins. The first thing I want to point out is that our fresh bin does not have a lock on it. And that is because every time we add material, we need to access both bins. So rather than unlocking each bin, this cable will allow us to access both bins with one lock. So first thing we're going to do is open our lock. We want to flip open the hasp and remove this loop. So I also always recommend that you take the lock and hang it right back where it was rather than putting it in your pocket or setting it on the lid, just to make sure it doesn't disappear. So with this loop off, that gives us slack so that we can basically step over to our fresh bin and do the same thing, where we remove the hook, flip open the hasp, and put the hook back. So now that everything's unlocked, we can go ahead and open our lids. And I want to point out that there's a little bit more information here inside our fresh lid. We have the contact information of our site lead, and we also have a material addition guide. And that is because when we add material, we want to incorporate it into the pile. That helps both accelerate the decomposition process and also reduce odors and reduce the pests that are attracted to them, in particular, gnats and fruit flies. So now that we have our bins open, let's get you a little bit closer and take a look inside. All right, so you can see we have our browns bin full of leaves here and our fresh bin with our active compost in it here. So this is where we get our food scraps and follow the next step, which is adding material using our material addition guide. So the first step, we already weighed our material, so that's taken care of. Next, we take our hand cultivator, which lives on this hook here on the inside of our browns bin, and then we rake out a spot to add our material. Now, we don't need to dig it too deep. We just need to get it enough to move material off to the side that we can rake back on top of it after. And notice it's a little bit shallow. So the next step is we get an equal volume of browns to our greens. So I want to show you, this is our food material. You can see it's about that deep or so. So we're going to keep that in mind, and we're going to try to get about that amount of browns, which, yeah, so that's going to be about this amount. We're going to spread that in the area that we just raked out, and then we are going to put our food directly on top of it. And notice they're spread out a little bit. We don't want to have one big pile of browns with one big pile of greens on top of it. We want them to be able to mix, so we just make a thin layer of each, about an inch or two thick. I like to pat it down a little bit, and then we take the material that we moved off to the side originally, and we cover our addition back up. So now you see there may be a few other pieces of material that get exposed when you do so. That's okay. You can just kind of cover it up as best as you can, and if you need to, you can just add a few more leaves on top to get that taken care of. So that's how you add your material, and our food waste is now composting. The only thing we have left to do is lock up, which is just the reverse of the unlocking process. So we will close our lids, we will start on the fresh bin, and we will do the hasp first, then the hook over, then we'll go back to our browns bin, and we'll do the loop, then hasp, then lock. And if you're ever uncertain about how to close it up, there is one more little guide here that will show you each step that we just did. So we close our lock, we spin the combination, and that's it. We're locked up. The last thing I want to say is the most important, and that is that the best kind of waste is the waste that is never generated. It may be tempting to pat ourselves on our back and say, look at all this food waste that we've diverted, but the important thing is making sure that we eat everything that can be eaten, because that is where the real impact is. So to wrap things up, there is a review questionnaire for you to complete here, and once you submit it, you will receive the code for the lock and your pail and guide, so you can go ahead and get started. If you signed up to be a turner, you can find that training video here. And with that, I want to say thank you for watching and happy composting.